Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a war happening inside your mind that you might not even know exists. Every day, millions of people wake up with grand ambitions, set clear goals, and genuinely believe they're moving forward. Yet somehow, they find themselves trapped in the same patterns, making the same mistakes, wondering why success feels like trying to hold water in their bare hands. Here's what the research shows us, and it's deeply unsettling. According to a comprehensive study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, over 85% of people actively work against their own stated objectives through unconscious mental patterns. We're not talking about laziness or lack of motivation. We're talking about sophisticated psychological mechanisms that operate beneath the surface of our awareness, systematically dismantling our progress while we remain completely oblivious to their existence. The ancient philosophers understood this paradox long before modern psychology gave it a name. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Personal Reflections, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." Yet he also warned us about the mind's capacity for self-deception. He knew that our greatest enemy isn't the world around us. It's the unconscious patterns that govern our thoughts, decisions, and actions. Before we dive deep into these 5 signs, I want you to consider subscribing to this channel if you're serious about building habits that create lasting success. We explore the psychology behind human behavior every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous. These patterns of self-sabotage don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning labels or obvious symptoms. Instead, they masquerade as rational thinking, as protective mechanisms, as wisdom gained from experience. They convince us that we're being reasonable when we're actually being cowardly, that we're being practical when we're actually being paralyzed by fear. The first sign your mind is sabotaging you is what psychologists call analysis paralysis disguised as thoroughness. On the surface, this looks like diligence. It looks like responsibility. You tell yourself you're being careful, methodical, thorough in your approach. You research endlessly, plan extensively, and gather information with the dedication of a scholar preparing for the most important examination of their life. But here's the psychological reality. When we overanalyze, we're often avoiding the discomfort of taking action. Dr. Sheena Iyengar's groundbreaking research at Columbia University demonstrated that when faced with too many choices or too much information, we don't become better decision makers, we become paralyzed. The study showed that customers presented with 24 varieties of jam were significantly less likely to make a purchase than those presented with just 6 options. Your mind uses this mechanism against you by convincing you that you need just a little more information, just one more perspective, just a bit more time to think it through. Meanwhile, opportunities pass, momentum dies, and what started as preparation becomes procrastination wearing the mask of wisdom. Think about the last major decision you postponed. Was it really because you lacked crucial information, or was it because taking action felt uncertain and uncomfortable? The mind is extraordinarily skilled at creating elaborate justifications for avoiding the vulnerability that comes with committed action. The second sign operates even more subtly. Perfectionist procrastination masquerading as high standards. This is perhaps the most insidious form of self-sabotage because it feels so noble, so admirable. You tell yourself and others that you have high standards, that you refuse to do anything halfway, that quality matters more than speed. But perfectionism, as research from psychologist Dr. Brené Brown has shown, isn't about high standards, it's about fear. It's the mind's way of avoiding criticism, rejection, or failure by never fully committing to completion. When we demand perfection, we create an impossible standard that justifies endless revision, constant doubt, and perpetual delay. Your mind convinces you that the work isn't ready yet, that it could be better, that it needs just a little more refinement. But what's really happening is that you're protecting yourself from the possibility of judgment by never fully exposing your efforts to the world. The perfectionist mindset keeps you safe in the realm of potential rather than vulnerable in the realm of reality. The cruel irony is that this protection mechanism prevents you from developing the very skills and resilience you need to create genuinely excellent work. Excellence isn't born from avoiding mistakes. It's forged through embracing them, learning from them, and iterating beyond them. Consider how this manifests in your own life. How many projects remain unfinished because they weren't quite perfect enough? How many opportunities have you declined because you didn't feel completely prepared? The mind whispers that you're maintaining standards, but you're actually maintaining stagnation. The third sign your mind is working against you is comfort zone rationalization disguised as contentment. This is perhaps the most philosophical of all the sabotage patterns because it touches on fundamental questions about what constitutes a meaningful life. Your mind has an extraordinary ability to reframe limitation as wisdom, to present fear as mature acceptance of reality. It tells you that wanting more is greedy, that ambition is shallow, that you should be grateful for what you have. And while gratitude is indeed a virtue, using it as an excuse to avoid growth is a perversion of its true nature. The Stoic philosophers understood this distinction clearly. Epictetus taught that we should be content with what we cannot control while taking full responsibility for what we can control. But modern self-sabotage flips this wisdom on its head, using contentment as an excuse for not taking responsibility for the areas of life where we do have influence and choice. Your mind convinces you that your current situation is acceptable, even when it's slowly suffocating your potential. It frames complacency as maturity, settling as wisdom, and resignation as peace. But true contentment comes from knowing you've given your full effort to become who you're capable of becoming, not from convincing yourself that you never had the potential in the first place. This rationalization is particularly dangerous because it doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like growing up, like becoming realistic, like accepting the way things are. But there's a profound difference between accepting external circumstances you cannot change and accepting internal limitations you've never truly tested. The fourth sign operates through what I call social validation seeking disguised as collaboration. In our deeply connected world, the mind has found new ways to avoid the discomfort of independent action by constantly seeking approval, input, and validation from others. On the surface, this looks like healthy collaboration. You consult with friends, seek advice from mentors, gather opinions from colleagues. But beneath this apparent wisdom lies a more troubling reality. You're outsourcing your decision-making authority to avoid taking full responsibility for your choices. Dr. Robert Cialdini's research on social proof shows us that we naturally look to others for cues about how to behave, especially in uncertain situations. But when this healthy tendency becomes a compulsive need for consensus, it transforms from a useful tool into a sophisticated avoidance mechanism. Your mind convinces you that you're being thoughtful and inclusive when you're actually being paralyzed by the fear of making a wrong decision. Every additional opinion you seek provides another opportunity to delay, another reason to reconsider, another excuse to avoid the fundamental loneliness of choice. The tragedy is that this pattern not only prevents decisive action but also dilutes your ability to develop sound judgment. When you constantly defer to others, you never develop the confidence that comes from making decisions, living with their consequences, and learning from the results. Are you truly seeking wisdom when you ask for advice, or are you seeking permission to avoid responsibility? The mind is masterful at confusing the two, presenting cowardice as collaboration and dependency as humility. The fifth and perhaps most devastating sign is learned helplessness disguised as realism. This is where the mind's capacity for self-deception reaches its most sophisticated level, where it convinces you that limitation isn't a choice but an immutable fact of reality. Psychologist Martin Seligman's famous experiments with dogs revealed how quickly living beings can learn to accept suffering as inevitable, even when escape becomes possible. The dogs, after experiencing inescapable shock, would later remain passive even when they could easily avoid the pain. They had learned that their actions didn't matter, and this belief became more powerful than the reality of their situation. Your mind employs this same mechanism on a daily basis, collecting evidence of past failures, limitations, and disappointments to build an ironclad case for why certain outcomes are simply impossible for you. It presents this collection of selective evidence as mature realism, as hard-won wisdom about the way the world works. But what you're actually experiencing is a carefully curated delusion designed to protect you from the discomfort of hope and effort. The mind finds it easier to accept powerlessness than to risk the vulnerability that comes with genuine attempt and potential failure. This learned helplessness masquerades as wisdom, but it's actually a form of emotional cowardice. It takes courage to maintain hope in the face of uncertainty, to continue believing in possibility when past evidence suggests limitation. The mind offers you the false comfort of certainty, the certainty of defeat, rather than the authentic discomfort of not knowing what might be possible if you truly committed to finding out. As we prepare to move into the deeper mechanics of how these patterns operate, I want you to ask yourself this question. Which of these 5 signs resonated most strongly with your own experience? Because recognition is the first step toward liberation, and liberation is what we're after. We're not here to simply understand our limitations, we're here to transcend them. Now that we've identified these 5 signs, we need to understand the psychological architecture that makes them so powerful and so persistent. Because here's what most people miss. These patterns aren't random quirks of personality or simple bad habits that can be overcome with willpower alone. They're sophisticated psychological defense systems that have evolved to serve a specific purpose, protecting you from the existential anxiety that comes with taking full responsibility for your life. The human mind, in its infinite creativity, has developed what cognitive psychologists call defensive attribution. This is the unconscious process by which we explain our failures and limitations in ways that protect our self-image while simultaneously justifying inaction. It's a masterpiece of psychological engineering that allows us to maintain our sense of self-worth while avoiding the terror of genuine responsibility. Dr. Leon Festinger's groundbreaking work on cognitive dissonance revealed that when our actions conflict with our beliefs or self-image, the mind doesn't simply change the behavior, it changes the story. We create elaborate narratives that explain why our current situation is actually the result of external forces, circumstances beyond our control, or simply the way things have to be. But here's where this becomes truly insidious. These narratives feel completely authentic to us. They don't feel like excuses or rationalizations. They feel like hard-won truths about reality. The mind doesn't present them as convenient lies, but as mature insights gained through experience. This is why simply knowing about these patterns isn't enough to overcome them. They're protected by layers of seemingly rational justification. Let's examine how this works in practice. When analysis paralysis takes hold, your mind doesn't tell you that you're avoiding action out of fear. Instead, it presents a compelling case for why more information is genuinely necessary. It points to examples of people who acted hastily and failed. It reminds you of times when you didn't research enough and made mistakes. It constructs a logical argument for why prudence demands more preparation. The mind becomes your advocate for inaction, building such a convincing case that taking action begins to feel reckless, impulsive, even irresponsible. You're not procrastinating, you're being thorough. You're not avoiding risk, you're being strategic. The narrative is so seamless that you genuinely believe you're demonstrating wisdom rather than cowardice. This same mechanism operates with perfectionist procrastination, but with an even more sophisticated twist. Here, the mind co-opts your genuine desire for excellence and transforms it into a weapon against achievement. It takes your highest values, quality, craftsmanship, integrity, and uses them to justify perpetual delay. The psychological research on this is remarkable. Studies show that perfectionists aren't actually more successful than non-perfectionists in achieving high-quality outcomes. In fact, they often produce lower quality work because they spend so much time on minor revisions and adjustments that they never develop the judgment that comes from completing projects and receiving feedback. But the mind doesn't present perfectionism as a limitation, it presents it as a virtue. It tells you that you care more than others do, that you have higher standards, that you refuse to accept mediocrity. Meanwhile, your high standards become an elaborate prison that prevents you from developing the very excellence you claim to value. The comfort zone rationalization operates through what psychologists call system justification, the unconscious tendency to defend and rationalize the status quo, even when it's clearly not serving us. Your mind becomes incredibly creative at explaining why your current situation is actually preferable to the uncertainty that would come with pursuing something better. It points to the stress that ambitious people experience, the sacrifices that success requires, the potential for failure that comes with attempting something new. It builds a case that your current limitations are actually forms of wisdom, that your lack of progress is actually a form of contentment, that your resignation is actually a form of peace. What makes this particularly powerful is that there's always some truth to these arguments. Ambition can create stress. Success does require sacrifice. Attempting new things does involve risk of failure. The mind takes these genuine truths and weaves them into a narrative that makes inaction seem like the obviously intelligent choice. But here's what the mind carefully omits from this narrative: the cost of not trying. It doesn't factor in the slow erosion of self-respect that comes from repeatedly choosing safety over growth. It doesn't calculate the compound effect of small compromises over time. It doesn't consider the profound regret that comes from reaching the end of life and wondering what might have been possible. The social validation pattern operates through what social psychologists call diffusion of responsibility. When we involve others in our decision-making process, we unconsciously spread the accountability for outcomes across multiple people. This feels like wisdom, seeking counsel, gathering perspectives, making informed decisions. But it's often a sophisticated way of avoiding the full weight of choice. Your mind presents this as collaborative leadership or humble wisdom seeking, but what's really happening is that you're creating conditions where no single person, including yourself, bears full responsibility for the outcome. If things go wrong, you can point to the advice you received, the consensus you built, the input you gathered. If things go right, you can share the credit. Either way, you're protected from the existential weight of being fully accountable for your choices. This pattern is particularly seductive in our age of information abundance. There's always another expert to consult, another perspective to consider, another data point to gather. The mind uses this endless availability of input as justification for endless delay, presenting each new consultation as evidence of thorough preparation rather than sophisticated procrastination. The learned helplessness pattern operates through what cognitive therapists call confirmation bias on steroids. Your mind becomes a detective, but not an objective one. It's specifically looking for evidence that supports the conclusion that change is impossible, that your limitations are permanent, that your situation is fixed. It collects every past failure, every disappointment, every setback as evidence in this case. But it carefully excludes contradictory evidence, times when you overcame obstacles, moments when you surprised yourself with your capabilities, examples of others who started from similar circumstances and achieved different outcomes. The mind presents this selective collection of evidence as realism, as hard-won wisdom about the way the world works. It tells you that hope is naive, that optimism is childish, that accepting limitations is mature. Meanwhile, it's actually constructing an elaborate delusion designed to protect you from the vulnerability that comes with genuine effort and the possibility of disappointment. What makes all of these patterns so persistent is that they're rooted in genuine psychological needs. The need for security, for predictability, for protection from pain and disappointment. These aren't character flaws, they're human requirements. The problem isn't that we have these needs, but that our minds have developed strategies for meeting them that ultimately undermine our deeper need for growth, meaning, and authentic achievement. Understanding this architecture is crucial because it reveals why willpower alone is insufficient to overcome these patterns. You can't simply decide to stop engaging in analysis paralysis or perfectionist procrastination. These patterns are serving important psychological functions, and until you develop alternative ways to meet those needs, your mind will continue to default to the familiar strategies that have kept you safe, even if they've also kept you small. The ancient Stoics understood this deeply. They recognized that the mind's primary function isn't to help you achieve your goals, it's to help you survive. And in the mind's calculation, survival often means avoiding the risks that come with genuine growth and authentic achievement. Epictetus taught his students to observe their thoughts without being controlled by them, to recognize the difference between their authentic desires and the defensive patterns that masquerade as rational thinking. This wasn't about suppressing natural human needs for security and comfort, but about developing the wisdom to distinguish between genuine prudence and sophisticated self-sabotage. As we move into understanding how to work with these patterns rather than against them, remember this: your mind isn't your enemy. It's a powerful tool that has learned to use its considerable abilities in service of keeping you safe. Our task isn't to defeat it, but to redirect its power toward serving your deeper aspirations rather than your surface fears. The question we must ask ourselves is this: what would become possible if we could harness the mind's creativity, its analytical power, its pattern recognition abilities, and direct them toward building the life we actually want rather than defending the life we've settled for? To truly free ourselves from these patterns of self-sabotage, we need to understand not just what the mind is doing, but how it's doing it. The latest neuroscientific research has revealed something profound about the nature of these mental patterns. They're not just psychological habits, they're literal neural pathways that have been carved deep into the landscape of your brain through years of repetition and reinforcement. Dr. Rick Hanson's groundbreaking work in neuroplasticity shows us that the brain has what he calls a negativity bias. It's naturally inclined to notice, remember, and be influenced by negative experiences roughly 5 times more than positive ones. This isn't a design flaw, it's a survival feature. Our ancestors who were constantly scanning for threats and remembering dangers lived longer than those who were naturally optimistic and trusting. But in our modern world, this same mechanism that kept our ancestors alive now works against our psychological and spiritual development. Your brain is literally wired to pay more attention to what could go wrong than to what could go right. It's designed to remember your failures more vividly than your successes, to anticipate problems more readily than opportunities. This explains why the 5 signs of mental sabotage feel so natural, so rational, so obviously correct. They're not fighting against your brain's wiring, they're working with it. When your mind engages in analysis paralysis, It's using your brain's natural threat detection system to identify all the ways that action could lead to danger. When you fall into perfectionist procrastination, your brain is trying to protect you from the social rejection that could come from producing imperfect work. But here's where this gets truly fascinating. The same neuroplasticity that carved these defensive patterns can be redirected to carve new pathways that serve your higher aspirations. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz's research with OCD patients revealed that conscious, deliberate practice can literally rewire the brain, creating new neural superhighways while allowing old, destructive patterns to atrophy through disuse. The key insight from this research is that we can't simply think our way out of these patterns. The neural pathways that support self-sabotage have been strengthened through years of use. They're like deeply worn grooves in a record. Your thoughts naturally fall into them unless you make a conscious, sustained effort to create alternative pathways. This is where the ancient philosophical practices reveal their profound wisdom. The Stoics didn't have fMRI machines or knowledge of neurotransmitters, but they understood something crucial about the nature of mental transformation. It requires consistent, deliberate practice over time. They developed specific exercises, daily practices, and mental disciplines not because they were intellectually interesting, but because they physically reshaped the brain. Let's explore how to apply this understanding to each of the 5 signs of self-sabotage we've identified. For analysis paralysis disguised as thoroughness, the neurological reality is that your brain has learned to find comfort in the information-gathering phase of decision-making. The act of researching, planning, and analyzing releases small amounts of dopamine. You feel productive without the risk that comes with committed action. Your brain has literally learned to prefer the safety of preparation to the vulnerability of execution. The intervention isn't to stop gathering information entirely, but to create new neural pathways that associate action with safety rather than danger. This requires what neuroscientists call graduated exposure, deliberately taking small actions before you feel completely prepared, and training your brain to recognize that the catastrophic outcomes it predicts rarely materialize. Start with decisions that have minimal consequences but maximum learning potential. Choose restaurants without reading every review. Send emails before crafting the perfect message. Make purchases without comparing every option. Each time you act with incomplete information and survive, which you will, you're weakening the neural pathway that associates action with danger and strengthening the pathway that associates action with growth and competence. For perfectionist procrastination masquerading as high standards, the neurological pattern is even more complex. Your brain has learned to associate completion with vulnerability and revision with safety. The act of endless improvement creates a sense of progress without the risk of judgment that comes with actually finishing something. The intervention requires training your brain to find completion rewarding rather than terrifying. This means deliberately practicing what researchers call good enough standards, setting specific completion criteria in advance and sticking to them regardless of how the work could theoretically be improved. But here's the crucial part. You need to pair completion with positive experience. Celebrate finishing things, even when they're imperfect. Share completed work with trusted friends who can provide encouraging feedback. Create rewards for yourself that are directly tied to completion rather than perfection. Over time, your brain will start to associate finishing with positive emotions rather than anxiety. For comfort zone rationalization disguised as contentment, you're working against what neuroscientists call habituation, the brain's tendency to adapt to existing circumstances and resist change. Your neural pathways have become accustomed to your current level of challenge, stress, and stimulation. Anything beyond this feels unnecessarily difficult, even when intellectually you know it would be beneficial. The intervention requires gradually expanding what your brain considers normal and comfortable. This isn't about dramatic life changes or extreme challenges. It's about incremental expansion of your comfort zone in multiple areas simultaneously. Take slightly different routes to familiar places. Initiate conversations with people you normally wouldn't approach. Try activities that are just beyond your current skill level. Each small expansion teaches your brain that growth and change can be safe and rewarding. You're literally rewiring the neural pathways that determine what feels comfortable versus what feels threatening. Over time, what once seemed impossible becomes merely challenging, and what once seemed challenging becomes routine. For social validation seeking disguised as collaboration, the neurological pattern involves what researchers call external locus of control. Your brain has learned to look outside itself for signals about whether decisions are correct or incorrect. This pattern often develops early in life and becomes deeply embedded in your neural architecture. The intervention requires strengthening what neuroscientists call your anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region responsible for independent decision-making and conflict resolution. This happens through deliberately making decisions without seeking external input, starting with low-stakes choices and gradually increasing the significance. Practice ordering at restaurants without asking others what they're having. Choose movies or books based on your own instincts rather than reviews or recommendations. Make small purchases without consulting friends or family. Each independent decision strengthens your brain's capacity for autonomous choice and weakens the neural pathways that depend on external validation. For learned helplessness disguised as realism, you're working against what neuroscientists call depressive realism, a state where the brain has learned to interpret neutral or even positive information through a lens of limitation and impossibility. Your neural pathways have become hypersensitive to evidence of constraint and blind to evidence of possibility. The intervention requires what researchers call cognitive restructuring, combined with behavioral activation. This means deliberately seeking out and focusing on evidence that contradicts your learned helplessness while simultaneously taking small actions that prove your capacity for influence and change. Keep a daily record of moments when you influenced outcomes, however small. Notice times when initial predictions proved wrong. Seek out stories of people who overcame similar limitations to yours. Each piece of contradictory evidence weakens the neural pathways supporting learned helplessness while strengthening pathways that support agency and possibility. But here's what makes this process genuinely transformative rather than merely therapeutic. You're not just changing your behavior or your thinking. You're literally rebuilding your brain's architecture. The new neural pathways you create through consistent practice become stronger over time, while the old patterns of self-sabotage gradually weaken through disuse. This is why the ancient philosophers emphasized daily practice rather than occasional insights. They understood, perhaps intuitively, that transformation requires consistent physical changes to the organ that generates thoughts, emotions, and decisions. Reading about wisdom isn't enough. Understanding principles isn't enough. Only deliberate, repeated practice creates the neural foundation for a genuinely different way of being. If you're finding value in this deeper understanding of how your mind works, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We explore the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern psychology every week, and you'll want to stay connected as we continue this journey together. As we prepare to move into specific strategies for implementing this transformation, remember that you're not fighting against your brain. You're working with its natural capacity for change and growth. The same neuroplasticity that created your patterns of self-sabotage can create patterns of self-empowerment. The same brain that learned to protect you through limitation can learn to serve you through expansion. The question is no longer whether change is possible. Neuroscience has settled that debate definitively. The question is whether you're willing to engage in the consistent, deliberate practice required to physically rewire your brain in service of your deepest aspirations. Now we arrive at the most crucial part of this journey: how to transform this understanding into practical, sustainable change. Because knowledge without application is just sophisticated entertainment, and insights without implementation are just intellectual decoration. We need a systematic approach to building what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility, the capacity to grow stronger from stress, uncertainty, and challenge rather than simply enduring them. The ancient Stoics had a profound understanding of this principle long before modern psychology gave it a name. They didn't just seek to survive life's difficulties. They developed practices that allowed them to become more capable, more resilient, and more wise through encountering obstacles. This is the mindset we need to cultivate as we work to overcome the patterns of self-sabotage we've identified. The first strategy involves what I call conscious incompetence training. This directly addresses analysis paralysis by deliberately practicing action in the face of incomplete information. But we're not talking about reckless behavior or ignoring genuine risks. We're talking about training your nervous system to tolerate the discomfort that comes with making decisions without perfect information. Start by identifying areas of your life where over-analysis has become a pattern. Choose one decision you've been postponing because you feel you need more information. Set a specific deadline, perhaps 1 week from now, by which you will make this decision based only on the information you can gather in a predetermined amount of time. During this week, notice your mind's attempts to extend the deadline, to justify gathering more information, to find reasons why this particular decision requires more consideration. These are the neural pathways of self-sabotage in action. Observe them without judgment, but don't obey them. When the deadline arrives, make the decision and take action. Then, and this is crucial, pay attention to what actually happens versus what your mind predicted would happen. In most cases, you'll discover that the catastrophic outcomes your brain imagined were vastly overblown, while your capacity to handle uncertainty was vastly underestimated. Each time you complete this process, you're strengthening what neuroscientists call your uncertainty tolerance, your brain's ability to function effectively without complete information. Over time, what once felt terrifyingly uncertain will start to feel merely challenging, and what once felt challenging will start to feel routine. The second strategy addresses perfectionist procrastination through what I call deliberate imperfection practice. This isn't about lowering your standards. It's about training your brain to find completion more rewarding than endless revision. Choose a project you've been postponing because it doesn't feel ready yet. Set specific, measurable completion criteria before you begin working on it. Write these criteria down, then commit to finishing the project when it meets these criteria, regardless of how it could theoretically be improved. As you work, notice your mind's attempts to revise the completion criteria, to identify new ways the work could be enhanced, to delay finishing because of just one more thing that needs to be addressed. This is the perfectionist pattern asserting itself. Acknowledge these thoughts, but return to your original completion criteria. When you finish the project, not when it's perfect, but when it meets your predetermined criteria, celebrate the completion. Share it with others if appropriate. Submit it or implement it or publish it. Train your brain to associate finishing with positive emotions rather than anxiety about imperfection. Then do something counterintuitive. Resist the urge to immediately start improving it. Let it exist in its finished but imperfect state for a predetermined period. This teaches your brain that imperfection isn't catastrophic, that completion has its own value independent of perfection. The third strategy combats comfort zone rationalization through what I call progressive discomfort exposure. This involves systematically expanding your tolerance for uncertainty, challenge, and growth-oriented stress while maintaining your ability to distinguish between productive discomfort and genuinely harmful situations. Create what psychologists call a growth edge map. Identify specific areas where you've been avoiding challenge or change because it feels uncomfortable. These might include professional risks you've been postponing, social situations you've been avoiding, or personal challenges you've been rationalizing away. Choose one item from this map and commit to taking one small action toward it this week. The key word is small. You're not trying to transform your entire life overnight. You're training your nervous system to tolerate the discomfort that comes with growth. As you take this action, pay careful attention to your mind's narrative. Notice how it tries to convince you that this discomfort is unnecessary, that your current situation is actually preferable, that wanting more is somehow greedy or ungrateful. These are the comfort zone rationalizations in real time. Don't argue with these thoughts, simply observe them while continuing to take the action you committed to. Over time, your brain will learn that growth-oriented discomfort is safe and ultimately rewarding, while stagnation-oriented comfort leads to a slow erosion of vitality and self-respect. The fourth strategy addresses social validation seeking through what I call autonomous decision-making conditioning. This involves deliberately making decisions without seeking external input, starting with low-stakes choices and gradually increasing the significance. Begin by identifying decisions you typically outsource to others. What to eat, what to watch, what to buy, how to spend your time. Choose one category and commit to making these decisions independently for 1 week. Notice your impulse to ask for opinions, to seek recommendations, to gather consensus. When these impulses arise, pause and ask yourself, what would I choose if I trusted my own judgment completely? Then make that choice and observe the results. In most cases, you'll discover that your independent decisions work out just as well as collaborative ones, while building your confidence in your own judgment. Gradually increase the significance of the decisions you make autonomously. Move from choosing restaurants to choosing weekend activities to choosing approaches to work projects to choosing responses to relationship challenges. Each autonomous decision strengthens your internal locus of control and weakens your dependence on external validation. The fifth strategy confronts learned helplessness through what I call evidence-based empowerment. This involves systematically collecting evidence of your capacity for influence and change while gradually increasing the scope and significance of the challenges you undertake. Start a daily practice of recording evidence that contradicts learned helplessness. Each evening, write down 3 things that happened during the day that demonstrate your ability to influence outcomes, however small. Perhaps you helped someone solve a problem, completed a task more efficiently than expected, or learned something new. Initially, your brain might resist this practice, claiming that these examples are insignificant or coincidental. This resistance is the learned helplessness pattern protecting itself. Continue the practice regardless of your brain's commentary. Simultaneously, begin taking on slightly larger challenges than you normally would. Volunteer for projects that stretch your capabilities. Apply for opportunities you're not quite qualified for. Engage in conversations with people you find intimidating. Each small success provides concrete evidence that your perceived limitations are more flexible than you believed. But here's what makes all of these strategies truly powerful. They're designed to work together synergistically. As you practice acting with incomplete information, you naturally encounter situations that require tolerance for imperfection. As you expand your comfort zone, you naturally create opportunities for autonomous decision-making. As you challenge learned helplessness, you naturally gather evidence of your capacity for growth and influence. The ancient philosophers called this virtue in action. the idea that wisdom isn't just intellectual understanding but embodied practice. Each strategy strengthens your psychological foundation while simultaneously building evidence of your capacity for genuine transformation. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate all uncertainty, discomfort, or challenge from your life. The goal is to develop what researchers call psychological flexibility, the ability to respond to life's inevitable difficulties with wisdom, courage, and resilience rather than avoidance, rationalization, and resignation. As we conclude this exploration, I want you to consider which of these strategies resonates most strongly with your current situation. Choose one, just one, and commit to practicing it for the next 30 days. Don't try to implement all 5 simultaneously. That's just another form of the perfectionist pattern we've been discussing. Remember to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We explore these intersections of ancient wisdom and modern psychology every week, and there's so much more depth to discover in this work. The path forward isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming who you already are beneath the layers of self-protective patterns that have accumulated over time. Your capacity for growth, courage, and authentic achievement has always been there. We've simply been learning how to access it consistently rather than accidentally. The question isn't whether you have what it takes to transform these patterns. The question is whether you're willing to engage in the consistent, patient practice required to prove it to yourself, one small action at a time. Because that's where transformation actually lives. Not in dramatic moments of insight, but in the accumulated power of daily choices aligned with your deepest aspirations rather than your surface fears. Your mind has been sabotaging you, but it doesn't have to continue. The same intelligence that created these sophisticated patterns of limitation can create equally sophisticated patterns of empowerment. The choice, as always, is yours to make.